Mr. Chairman, we meet again today with familiar faces, and I hope we are truly driven to success, all of us today. It's not a question of whether or not we want to have an automotive industry. I haven't met too many people that think America doesn't need one. It's a question of whether we can, and if we can, how do we get to that resolve? I just want to say that over these last troubling 2 weeks of preparing for this hearing, I've come to the conclusion that we're still talking at each other instead of to each other. I'm a little disappointed with the plans submitted because although they're much better than the preparations and the plans submitted 2 weeks ago, they're still tentative and not final. I listened intently to the testimony yesterday before the United States Senate, and several elements of that testimony struck me as being very important and something we should carry on here. One part of it was the testimony of the expert on the question of how much would it really cost. In his analysis, I believe it was Dr. Ambers, indicated that his estimate was $75 to $125 billion. I think at least we have one realist in town, and that's pretty good. There's nothing wrong with that. At least we know when we buy into this picture what we're buying into. As the folks left here 2 weeks, it was a $25 billion request. The new submission is a $35 billion request, and they're adding on the additional $25 billion that's in the energy bill, so that's already $59 billion. So we're not too far from the good doctor's estimates. He's giving us another 15 to 55 billion, and I think that's a reasonable range. Now, the question is whether we should. As I've concluded in my own mind, we should maintain an American automotive industry. There's no question about that. I hear some arguments made, particularly by labor, and labor's friends of mine, and they say, well, if you could give $200 or $700 billion to Wall Street, why can't you give $34 billion to the automotive industry? If we made a mistake in giving $700 billion to Wall Street, and I don't think we did, I think we made a mistake in how we gave it to them. I don't think the conditions were sufficient to make sure we accomplished the ends that we should have had in providing that kind of liquidity to the market. But that's, even if we made a mistake, it's not a justification for this Congress to make a second mistake. And it's time to me that we don't set this off. I think the automotive industry is as important as Wall Street. And I think it's all part of the total picture that we have to get to and correct. So I wish that argument wasn't made in terms of, well, you gave it to them, you now have to give it to us. And then we have a line out in front of the building here of 432 other industries, corporations, and others that have needs. Some of them are going bankrupt in my district. And I'm sure they're going to ask me, well, Congressman, if you gave the automotive industry all that money, why can't you take care of me and allow me to continue to operate my business and take care of my family and have a reasonable existence? We're not going to be able to do that. Whether we can take care of the automobile business, it really should be determined here and in a very short few days ahead. I think, one, we don't have time to write the real conditions and the real provisions that are necessary for the total recovery of the automobile industry. However, I suggest we do have time to come up with the $4 billion necessary for General Motors and potentially $4 billion necessary in a very short, very small bridge loan for the next 60 or 90 days to give this Congress a chance to return in January, continue working now until January, but in January in the new Congress to enact the type of legislation necessary to accomplish this end. If we're being practical, that's what we should be doing. This idea that it's late, guys, and you've got to pass it, you've got to do it, or nothing. I'm afraid a lot of people are overestimating the willingness of a goodly number of members of Congress to play chicken. And I think it would be a terrible game to experience that game of chicken and see the automotive industry go down because of it. So I suggest that we need some very strong activity here to work in conjunction with the executive branch, both the existing administration and the future administration and the Congress, to come up with the conditions necessary to accomplish an end and finance long-term for viability the automotive industry of America.